Good afternoon from India. My name is Raj Kumar. I'm the founding Vice Chancellor of OP Jindal Global University. Good evening to our friends in Australia and New Zealand. Good morning to our friends in North America and Canada. It is indeed my proud privilege to welcome all of you to the Global Virtual Conference on Reimagining and Transforming the Future of Legal Education and Law Schools. We are also here at the 28th thematic session of this conference on the theme, Women Leadership in Legal Profession and Legal Education. We have with us a very distinguished set of individuals who have leaders in their own right and have contributed to different aspects of institution building, legal profession, as well as corporate lawyering. Let me take this opportunity to welcome Professor Sandhya Drew, Senior Lecturer and Assistant Dean, International Students and Exchanges, the City University of London from the United Kingdom. We have with us Professor Dr. Ved Kumari, former Dean and Head of the Department of the Faculty of Law, University of Delhi. Ms. Pratibha Jain, Partner and Head, New Delhi Office of the NISHITH DESAI Associates, and a distinguished graduate of Jindal Global Law School, Ms. RAVEENA, SETHIA, Associate, SHARDUL, AMARCHAND, MANGALDAS, India. I'm also grateful to my colleague, Professor DIPIKA Jain, Vice Dean of Jindal Global Law School at OP Jindal Global University, who will be moderating this session. As we conceived the idea of this conference, we were very conscious of the fact that one of the most pressing issues in relation to both legal education, legal profession, and judiciary is the question of how do we diversify these institutions? To what extent women and leadership among women and by women is going to shape the future of legal education and legal profession? What can law schools do at a time when we are dealing with the pandemic, but also even beyond looking at the pandemic, to what extent law schools can contribute to both the intellectual discourse and indeed the policy level engagement in advancing the cause of diversifying the legal profession in all its forms and manifestations. While we know that many law schools, including law schools in India, at the time of entry, there are more than 50% women. But as we look at the legal profession itself, including judiciary and other aspects of legal profession, there are huge diversities, yet efforts have been made, but still the question of women playing a leadership role in legal education and legal profession is truly marginal. So with that, with those introductory words, I would like to hand this session to Professor DIPIKA Jain. I'll be back in 55 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Rajkumar. Thank you so much for all of you. This is my pleasure to moderate this very distinguished panel. This is a topic that I deeply care about. What I'm going to do is we're going to do 2 rounds of questions. In the first set, I'm going to ask a common question and request each of you to respond. In the second round, I'll ask specific questions addressed to each of you. First question, let me just launch into the question since Professor Rajkumar has set the stage. My first question is, the composition of the esteemed panel may in itself suggest a representation of how glass ceiling has been shattered within legal academia and legal profession. What are your views on the evolution of women leadership in law schools, law in councils, and the judiciary? I'll start with Professor Ved Kumari.
I don't think, I've been the dean and I've been a professor for a long time, but I don't think that is reflective of any systemic changes. I think my hard work plus a huge factor of my good luck has made me where I am. I do not find that in the institutional setup, there is any kind of, a systemic change there that we are not going to discriminate. And there are lots of factors for that which is happening. So I don't think that, we get into this whole idea because some woman has become a president, some woman has become a chief minister, and they're heading institutions and they're heading places. I don't think that is reflective of generally speaking, of women in India or elsewhere. Things are changing, but it's much more an individual than change in my understanding. Look at the next generation for ratio, very few women being born. So we might be visible there, out there in positions and all, but the data is very, very alarming, especially for the graduate plus mothers who are graduate plus, they are showing a very less percentage of girls being born to them. So they are actually, the education to them has meant nothing, excepting continuing with the same norm of wanting to have sons.
Thank you, Professor Kumari. I'd like to now move to Professor Drew, and we'd like to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Nithika. I'm going to set the clock for 4 minutes. To answer you, I mean, I think probably differently from most members of this panel, I don't think I've shattered any glass ceilings. I wasn't the first woman to go to university. I wasn't the first woman to go to the bar. I'm not the first woman to enter a senior position in a university. I'm not Kamala Harris. I'm not even Professor Sarah Gilbert, who has done what we call impact-making research. I've not overcome class barriers or disability. I'm a woman with education and with some ability who's had opportunities and taken them. And I'm also a woman at life's midway, as Dante would say. And I think those two things give me a big advantage. I think we need to move from the idea of shattering glass ceilings to looking at the trajectory of perhaps average or higher than average women and comparing it to the trajectory of average or higher than average men. This is the phase we should be aiming at, not at the exceptional individuals like Professor Kumari, who would probably make it under any circumstances. My contemporary university is now UK Prime Minister. I'm going to leave that point there diplomatically. I think we also need, you know, and again, this is about being at life's midway. I increasingly think generationally, we need to think about the trajectory from being a young woman setting out to, you know, being an older woman. And this is an issue of cross-generational understanding between women. In each stage of life, women face different hurdles. Almost all women have been eve-teased or sexually harassed or worse, being subjected to violence, which is intended to contain them. We've all had it, you know. You're constantly hit on as a younger woman. And this is a form of violence and containment of power. Then at the next stage, women face having to choose between long days at work or having children. Sometimes they'll move away from law, from the big city firms, precisely to have a family. I mean, I saw a judge's comment on online advocacy, and he said that, you know, the problem with online advocacy is that children are a nuisance. I mean, he probably regards his own children, if he has any, as a nuisance too. Yeah, we've got to get past that, where women have to choose. And then we get to older women, and they face invisibility, and by then a lower standard of pay. And I think, you know, I think those are the three stages, and we increasingly need to understand those intergenerational positions. And then I think there is an element sometimes of neurodiversity. I mean, across, as ever, there is a range, but these are barriers which exceptional women break through at cost, but we shouldn't expect everyone to be able to break through them. And I just want to sort of finish with 3 solutions, but before that, and an experience from my own practice. And I had a case which went right up to what was then the House of Lords. It was a woman, a science teacher, who was a lesbian and who had been bullied out of her workplace by students who had just constantly shouted abuse at her, and the school had done nothing, because at the time, this was in the early 90s, it was unlawful for schools to promote homosexuality, and they thought by protecting her from bullying they were promoting homosexuality. And as we lost at first instance, but with a very sympathetic court, we went increasingly up the appellate courts, and I had the experience of coming out of the court case and seeing a newspaper billboard with, you know, headlines relating to my client's case splashed across the billboard. And increasingly the 8 male appellate judges who heard us had no sense of what this was about. We were arguing for extension of the law to cover my client's case. The one exception was Lady Hale in the Court of Appeal. And I cannot describe for a young advocate what it was like to listen to a judge who had a sense of the wrong that had been done to my client, and also the power that she exuded in the court was astonishing. Now, that's obviously an exceptional women, and you know, as I said, we should be moving to the second stage of the average women like me who've sorry, that's my 4-minute time, so I'm going to be quick. But she was an exceptional president. She's retired now, but she extended court hearings to Northern Ireland, across the rail. She was an exceptional reformer in the role of reform. Clearly different in her approach to law from the male judges who surrounded her. On her own word, she's not a radical, but I think there's also a sort of a different approach that women bring. And so the point I wanted to finish on, and I'll perhaps save my other comments for later, is it's not just about the evolution of women in the law, it's that by evolving, women change the law. And that, I think, is the key point. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Professor Drew. So I think Professor Kumari and Professor Drew have pointed to the same thing, which is that there are structural barriers. So it isn't about individual journeys, and those are significant, but there are also structural barriers. Let me move on to Pratibha, who's extremely inspiring, and she's heading one of the finest law firms in the country for a very long time. And her personal journey has been very inspiring. So Pratibha, and you're in a law firm, and the first two set of speakers were looking at this discourse from the academia. So we'd love to hear from you what your perspective or what your experience has been and what your thoughts are on these questions.
Thanks, Deepika. So it's very interesting to hear Professor Kumari and Professor Drew, because you know, when you come to structural issues, right? I have practiced in various jurisdictions around the world. And by the time I came to India, I was already, you know, quite senior. I'd already been in the profession for a decade. And I felt like, you know, I had no glass ceiling in India compared to, you know, the other jurisdictions that I practiced in, which I found very interesting because, you know, we know the gender-related issues in our country. And I think I attribute that to various aspects. One, the structural issue that Professor Kumari and Professor Drew are talking about, like Raj mentioned in the introduction, 50% of graduates coming out of law school. However, you know, corporate law is comparatively a nascent profession compared to the bar and the judiciary. And somehow, I think the way the Indian corporate profession is set up, it's set up by a few families. It started relatively later, where there is more recognition of women coming into these professions. To start with, you had people like Zia, Pallavi, you know, very senior women who were in the profession. And I think it just helped it grow a little more equally than what I have seen in the rest of the world. And that's why I think when I came here, I just felt I didn't have to break the glass ceiling. In Tokyo, believe it or not, in my 100-year-old firm, I was the first woman in the Tokyo office. Whereas in the Indian legal corporate, I already had female partners to look up to when, you know, the clients had them, and to prove that, you know, it doesn't matter what the gender is. That's not to say you don't have those issues. I remember when I was in-house at Goldman, so I'm the corporate counsel that the lawyer senior partner comes to pitch to, and he says, oh, you know, we just don't hire women because they get pregnant and then they leave. And I found it very interesting, especially because I was pregnant at that time. So obviously he never got my business. But, you know, that thought process, even though it exists, I've just not felt it as hard as I felt it in New York, in Tokyo, not so much in Hong Kong. Asia also is relatively good as far as at least our profession is concerned in that regard. What I feel the most about in Indian judiciary, you know, the example Professor Drew was giving, if you have a judge in that position who understands even the kind of language that's sometimes used in Indian courts, would be less if we had even slightly better representation. I mean, only 3% of women in the Indian Supreme Court in India have been women. That's, by any global standards, abysmal. And so, you know, to the extent we were talking about what needs to be done, I think at the law school levels itself, and, you know, grade 3 professors are here, we need to be raising this issue and voicing this issue in this country at a much higher level, because it starts from the top at that level. And I think, you know, till we fix that, the corporate law might be doing okay for now, but, you know, there is a trickle down effect. And if everything is not growing, and to me, it's all about volume. what I tell my associates, what I tell everybody is, just stick it out there, right? The women who came before us had a harder time. We have less harder time. We want to make sure, you know, the next generation, it's much easier. And the only way is if there's volume out there, so that, you know, you're not, I've gone from, and even today there are meetings, especially when it's government related projects, where I'll be the only woman. I have this really amazing photo where, you know, there was the top level bankers from the public national banks, about 16 of them, all men, and me. And I was remembering Margaret Thatcher and her cabinet, which is all men. So, you know, those kind of pictures need to kind of, you know, start getting erased, and more women get there. And I think that has to start as soon as possible in the judiciary.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Pratibha. Absolutely. And I think this issue is really, really global. Recently, we started researching on it at Jindal Global Law School, and it's quite interesting to see. So there was a survey in 2013 by National Association of Law Placement in the United States, which said that there were 47% associates in law firms, but only 20% leaders and partners. So I think they have a lot of these disparities in law firms. So moving on to RAVEENA, who's a recent grad and a younger corporate lawyer. And you know, you work with another amazing law firm with a lot of women leaders. So it'd be great to share your perspective of how do you think women leadership is evolving or even changing, and how does that affect even younger people like you working in that profession?
Thank you. I think my views are partly aligned with what Professor Drew said and Pratibha ma'am said. I think at least as far as the Indian law firm setup is concerned, and the law firm that I work at, we have several female leaders and strong female leaders at that. But that being said, there is still a high imposter syndrome that women feel, where they feel inadequate or that they're not meant to be there at the table. And for centuries, we see women have just tried to get a seat at that table, knowing that, you know, their voices won't be heard as much. And that's slowly changing from at least my position, where I see my seniors voicing their opinions, making a point to voice concerns that are very female or very specific to their experiences, and expecting respect in return from their male colleagues and understanding, which I think is really helping towards developing that institution and making it more emotionally intelligent to consider the experiences of different kinds of people who work there. Today, we're moving to a situation where women want to, in fact, own their unique experiences and disrupt the stereotypical norms that are associated with this profession, and use their experiences to actually facilitate change, be it through running mental health seminars, which in my firm is run by a female partner, and which is really picked up, you know, with male associates and female associates, highlighting a huge problem that law firms face in terms of burnout, or even in terms of sexual harassment at the workplace, which is also something largely spearheaded by female colleagues and female partners to bring about greater awareness on problems that women face. I think a great testament, at least to my generation, that things are changing, even though there is a long way to go, is that today when I'm in a room and there are other people, mostly again men, they will turn and they will ask me, what do you do? And when I say I'm a lawyer, nobody answers back and says, oh, is it temporary, or how long are you going to work for? So I think this itself shows things are changing, but there's still a long way to go. And as Professor Drew said, we need to start looking at, you know, a larger set of women and not just the small anecdotal examples.
That was a positive note, the recognition that women can be lawyers and they're here to stay. I think Professor Kumari wants to respond, come back to some of the responses. So Professor, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of refer to one comment which Pratibha started with, saying 50% of girls coming out from law colleges was, Professor Rajkumar said so. But that's the figure which is more true for the National Law School law universities rather than the general university. In my university, we still don't have even 30% of women in the law profession, in the education arena. That's kind of aside, that's just one other thing. But I think this whole question about the glass ceiling, and Professor Drew was saying she has not broken any, and I think I did break one at least. I was the first chairperson of a judicial academy in the country, but that's not something anybody introduced me with. That's completely ignored. There have been deans before me, but that is the designation I get introduced with, but not the one which actually was on merit. Deanship is for us not an appointment, it is just by seniority. You happen to be the senior most at the right time and you get it. But that's how I get introduced, not with the real achievement I got. So, and when it comes to the glass ceiling, Pratibha and RAVEENA both are talking about that, we are finding place. But when it comes to the appointment as senior counsels, how many of the women have got appointments there? So you are well established in your institution, but that is your own individual firm. It is not straight recognition of your abilities. Lots of senior women, especially in Delhi, we got all these men getting appointments as senior counsels, and lots of them have to go out of the city to get them the designation of senior counsel. When it comes to appointment of judges from among these very senior, able women candidates, most of them are the men again getting to the High Court. So it is not that this whole space which is being now has become available. It's safe and it's kind of going to take you to a progression the way it would a man in the same position. And also when it comes to sexual harassment, means my students, so many of them face this when they come, because when they go to the profession, the first thing they face is sexual harassment. Even at the internship that they've faced it, with the Supreme Court judges included. So the extent of sexual harassment which the law graduates face during internship and post-learn, I don't think that's kind of made a very comfortable place for them. So yes, some of us has made it, but I don't think that's reflecting of that India has created that space for women to be comfortable. And all of us who are here in our positions are here because our families, individual families were supportive, not as an institutional support. My family supported, my husband supported, my in-law supported, whatever that may be the situation. So without, that you don't have to, we didn't have to struggle. But those who are, they are working double time all the way. They have to look after their children. And also in my faculty, when I see, every time it is the woman's responsibility to educate children. So you might be, a very able lawyer, but you have to be able mother, you have to be a able granny, you have to be able homemaker, you have to be multiple able for you to find your space to breathe properly, which is not a struggle which my male colleagues find. So I certainly think that it's kind of good to be in spaces where we are comfortable, we can assert ourselves, but that's kind of me, us, we are in the panel. This panel is all women. Women talking about our achievement. Where are the men? How do they see the women leadership? I think we needed to have a male person here, a panelist there to respond to the claim that no, we are doing very well and we are all comfortably in our spaces. So okay, that's a thought one can always pursue later on. But I certainly think that it is important to recognize that yes, we have made some progress, but nothing which I would say in my understanding, and especially because our mindset hasn't changed. And in that sense, because I come from the academia, I certainly believe that education has failed us, not creating any spaces to talk about women. We have this optional paper called Gender Justice, which is opted by 40 students out of 2,000 we have in the law faculty. I mean, that's the interest we have in these other people to talk about. So I certainly think that just because, and I think we need to really open ourselves to see what's happening around us, to other people who are still struggling, who are still not finding. And why is it that if everything was hunky-dory in the legal profession, then we should have had by now so many judges and so many senior lawyers who are women. We're not there.
So Professor KUMARI, actually my second question is related to what you just said. And I think it's true that it's still a struggle. But you've had so much experience in academia. In fact, you've been inspiration for many young academics like me. I just wanted to ask you, what role can law schools play in enabling more women leaders in the legal profession? Is there a role for law schools to enable some kind of women leadership in the legal profession?
No, for me, the first thing is to talk about discrimination. Law schools do not talk about discrimination anymore. We do not teach law and poverty. We do not teach gender as a compulsory subject. We do not even include a gender component in the other courses. So that's something, a taboo. most of us, and we've had this so many times, a discussion about it. Every time there's a seminar, there will be work-life balance only for women. Men don't have to do any of that part of it. And I certainly believe that unless the education includes diversity as a necessary component of discussion, that diversity will be including women, but not only women. We certainly need to talk about disability, need to talk about this other, whoever that other is. There are lots of categorization of other. And unless we relook at our curricula to see how much discussion on other injustice we have. Mr. Bakshi asked this question many times. When we teach in the law faculty, in how many courses the teachers and the students heard or used the word justice as a goal of legal education or law? We're always going to nitty-gritties, legal profession, blah, blah, but justice, and justice certainly is a concern for those who are disempowered by law. So that's not a component of conversation. Corporate law is one line, international law is another line, criminal law is another line. And there are ghettos there that you talk about this subject, but not the people who are getting affected by that. How does a policy affects different kinds of people? So when we are dealing with company law, how does the company's profit or what we do is formation of company, winding up of company, partners, sleeping partner and working partners, and I don't know, all those kinds of things. But we do not work on that. What is the role they have, or the manner in which they impact on the lives of the consumers of that company? So I certainly think that the legal education has to revamp itself. For creating leadership, one has to have leaders, thought leaders to start with. And thought leaders has to be inclusive in their approaches. Most of us have not experienced discrimination, and therefore we believe that discrimination doesn't exist. And unless we really hear our students speak to us, especially those who are discriminated, even in the national law schools, I've heard, I've not been a part of national law schools, so I don't know personally, but what I've heard from students who are doing researches or colleagues who are there, that there is this whole chunk of students who are on fellowship. So they're trying to be inclusive in that sense. But within the student body, they are the excluded category. So I don't think, unless we do integration among our students itself, unless we are inclusive in the way we teach our classes, the studies have shown that in the classrooms, unless the teacher is sensitive to give spaces, special spaces for women to speak, women students pass out without speaking a word for 3 years. A lot of male students also do, but majority of the women students do. So I certainly think that the classes itself are so hierarchical, both from the teacher-taught category, but within the taught category itself also. As an administrator in the law faculty, whenever there was a rule to be employed, and certainly I had a notorious life as a dean, detaining students, that was a lot of agitations were there. And they will come and say, no, madam, you are like our mother. So which means that you don't have to be an administrator. You have to be mother, to include children, to pardon them, to love and give love and affection. Discipline is not the job of the mother. So even if you're a dean, you should not cease to be a mother. And that's an argument I've not heard being made to the male deans in the past or future deans. So the moment it is a woman in the boss category, she is always should be functioning as a mother, care and love and affectionate, no discipline. Discipline is not your job. So I certainly think the way we conceive of the bosses, women bosses, is also an important discussion point. And maybe, Rajkumar, we should call Rajkumar and say, what has been his experience with the women bosses, if he has ever had any?
Right. Yes, Professor Kumari, I think these are all very important aspects that one must keep in mind as we are moving forward. And of course, these challenges are there in the law schools itself. Maybe I'm going to now move on to Professor Drew and just ask around, how do we make our law schools and organizations that we work in more diverse? What kind of policies do we need to make it diverse? And of course, Professor Kumari pointed to the limitations of diversity, and then just diversity is not enough. You also need inclusion. And so how do we actually work towards such policies?
I mean, I suppose you have policies, and you have policies which include positive action. That seems to me the issue. And you comply with those policies. You know, those policies are living instruments, not theoretical and illusory. And, you know, like any form of soft law, they can be used. So in a way, I find that quite a hard question to answer, because it seems to me that, of course, you should have policies and you should use them to advance diversity, and diversity as a value is very, you know, is very helpful. Can I come back on this question of the triangle? And is that okay? Can I take the rest of my 4 minutes on that? Because I wanted to pick up the challenge that Professor Kumari and I think Ms. Jain, Pratibha Jain put up throughout, which is, what's the role of the universities in creating different, you know, a different world in the future? And of course, you know, we all know that the triangle, you know, there's no exceptionalism at the bottom of the triangle. I gave an online webinar yesterday to students in Paris, group of 27, 24 were young women. So, you know, we know that something happens as you progress up the triangle. And I mean, we know that the children issue is massive as a disincentive. But I mean, I as a university worker, I tend to think you should give students two things: confidence and cunning, as they face the legal world. And you know, someone just said, you know, there's something going wrong because we have all these eager law students who leave as young women and then they dissipate. You know, why is that? And I think we should give them confidence. So in the words of the song, you know, mutti mein hai takdir hamari, we should make them leave university feeling that. And so how do I do that in my work? Well, you know, I, for example, did some films on advocacy models. I teach advocacy, and I made sure that there was a proper representation of young women across a diverse ethnic origins, so that when students were watching these videos, they just didn't get the same traditional white male, essentially. I think there is an issue about types of law. Certainly in my specialism, employment law, there are particular areas of employment law which men are briefed on. Transfer of undertakings, for example, you know, and I think we all are teachers, we should encourage students, if they're interested in intellectual property, and I'm sure Pratibha has points on this, but you know, if there are particular areas that are seen as complex commercial issues, they shouldn't just be the preserve of men. If a young woman's interested in specialising in that, let her specialise in that. I direct exchanges, and I think exchanges are a massive way of students developing, you know, good international practices. And so we're hoping to reintroduce actual exchanges, and maybe one way forward is virtual exchanges, and encouraging young women as young men to do that. And then I would also say, I mean, we had a UN report yesterday, didn't we, about how COVID, because women have had to do the bulk of the work during lockdown and so forth, academics, you know, female academics article production has gone down. You know, all women will say that they've just done more work at home. Teach our students to be cunning, teach our students to know that they will face challenges and a backlash, and equip them to deal with that, equip them to, you know, make sure that they get their career and their children, make sure that you know how to deal with harassment. So that seemed to be the second thing that we need to be doing. So I'm sorry to trespass and not really answer the question, but I think there should be policies, and I think they can be effective to answer the question.
Thank you so much, Professor Drew. Let me move on to Pratibha. Pratibha, there was a research done by this very interesting journalist called Lalita Panikar in her study on legal profession, and in the study, I wanted to just suggest a few things she said, but let me just quote one, and I quote: "There is pressure for women to be better than male colleagues, and women lawyers or judges who fight to make their voices heard are often described as aggressive. This trait is seen as a virtue in male legal professionals, but not women." How challenging has it been to break stereotypes, to make the larger impact that you have in the world of law, both as student, you know, you've done your postgrad from Oxford, Harvard, and then you worked in multiple jurisdictions, and then finally law, you know, heading a very interesting law firm in the country. So we'd really like to hear from you on this.
I was just saying that's a very interesting statement, because I remember my first review, my annual review in New York. My partner told me, you know what, Pratibha, it's a jungle out there. So you've got to be ready for it. And, you know, you got to, basically he was trying to tell me that I need to get more aggressive. And I wanted to ask him, how many of my male colleagues have you said that to? you know, but that was like my first introduction to whether you're aggressive, whether you are conciliatory in your negotiations, whether you look old, whether you look young, whether you look whatever traits you might have, right? It's not about the traits, it's about your gender. Right. So if you're aggressive, it's a problem. If you're conciliatory, it's a problem. And how do you deal with it? You've just got to remember that the other side, they're unconscious biases. I think, you know, if you want to ask me what universities need to do, they need to teach about unconscious biases. I think that's the most important thing, because most of the time the people I'm talking to, I was talking to this very senior BCG partner in one of our discussions, and he was like, why should you talk about it? You know, the corporate law firm world doesn't even have biases, so it's not something that is even applicable to your profession. And I laughed because, you know, they're all well-meaning people thinking, you know, it's equal, law treats you equally, and hence, you know, there is no bias. So what are you guys talking about? And let's just get out there, work equally hard, and you're going to get what you deserve. And no amount of statistics you throw at them is going to help you win the discussion. What's going to help you win the discussion is the unconscious bias discussion. There is a HBS study, I think, it's either HLS or HBS, where they take a very well-recognized leader and take out his name and give the study to two groups of students. To one, they present as a female, to the other as a male. And then come back and ask the group to talk about the leadership skills of this person. The group that thinks it's a female says that she's too aggressive, you know, she turns off people on the wrong way, etc., etc. The group that thinks that this person is a male comes back and says, what an amazing leader. And this is well documented. So you just can't win, right, Deepika? I mean, how do you manage it? You just manage it by laughing and smiling and saying, okay, I recognize it's out there, and I just need to make it, let's say, easier for RAVEENA, and RAVEENA is going to make it easier for the next generation. And like I said, it's about volume. But yes, I would love it. Let's get Raj back in and ask him, why are they not teaching unconscious bias in every class in the university?
Right. Yeah, I think it's really interesting that there are also research now, recent research, that is pointing to the fact that women are perhaps the better decision makers. They're the better leaders. When a woman is in the position, the pay scale is better, the negotiation is better, they're more compassionate. I mean, it could be pointing to some kind of gender stereotypical nature of like a caregiver woman being more compassionate, but there's also empirical evidence that things get better when women are in leadership. So coming to RAVEENA, I wanted to just get your view on this. What are the diverse and unique perspectives, experiences, and skills that women leaders bring to the table in the legal profession? Or even legal education, since you graduated so recently?
Yeah, I think drawing from what the other speakers have said so far, the fact that women are considered to be a certain way, or, you know, they've always felt out of place at a table, or people have perceived them to be a certain way, or too much aggression or too much compassion, you don't know where you belong. I think the biggest role they can play is in terms of, at least, and if we start from legal educational institutions, is to sort of demystify and break these unconscious biases and, you know, gender stereotypical norms. We need to sort of change our perceptions at a more fundamental level for men and women alike from a younger age, to sort of understand that it doesn't matter what your gender is. What matters is what you're able to do and achieve. And the opportunities need to be around for everybody in the same circumstance. But this is obviously a more grassroots change, which will take a lot of time. You were asking what educational institutions can do. And I think from a a very recent student perspective, I can say that, you know, something like a mentorship program or having strong female leaders have open discussions with younger students would really help them to become more comfortable in owning their opinion, their experiences, and being able to use that towards their benefit rather than thinking of it as a disincentive. I think secondly, the biggest thing that women can bring about is that they have diverse experiences, diverse responsibilities, and diverse roles as compared to men who usually have, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 set roles. They don't multitask and they're not expected to multi-manage. As compared to that today, unfortunately, women are meant to multi-manage, and, you know, there is no solution where you can give up one thing and do another in the practical world today. Women have, you know, so many skills that they can use towards the benefit of the profession, which are usually regarded as weak points, but are actually not. One of these things is, for example, having a higher emotional intelligence and being able to understand, like Professor Kumari pointed out, who is the law impacting the most? You know, who are the people being affected the most, and what can I do for them? We have examples in India, like Justice Geeta Mittal, for instance, who, while she was in the Delhi High Court, helped establish special courtrooms and guidelines with respect to examining witnesses who were vulnerable. And her initiative was actually applauded by the Supreme Court judges in 2017, and other states were asked to follow suit. If you ask me, and I don't know her personally, but if you ask me, I think it was probably her position as a woman, where she probably saw that vulnerability. She saw what it feels like to be, you know, at a disadvantage, and how to tackle that and make the law more accessible to people who it really aids and seeks to help. And I think that is an example to go by, where women can actually use their inherent skills or abilities to make the world better, until the world realizes that those are just, you know, human nature skills. It doesn't matter what your gender really is. And as far as it comes to teaching, I think as a student at Jindal, I think we did have a lot of professors who in every class would bring about these stereotypes. I remember several classes having one lecture each at least, mostly driven by our female professors, where they did say, now I've taught you all of this, this is in the statute, this is the case, but let's look at it from a twale or third party or a women perspective, and let's understand how does it impact them. And I think I'm very grateful to have had that opportunity, because I know I don't have those biases, at least to the extent possible, thanks to that legal education. And I hope that is facilitated in the future as well.
Right. Thank you for that, Raveena. So at GLS, we do have 50%, we have a policy of 50% women hiring and 50% women in leadership. We have 55% women faculty right now. Obviously, we have those numbers on diversity. And Professor Rajkumar just messaged me saying that he's ready for any kind of interrogation, either through the chat or he can join us. So maybe we can invite Professor Rajkumar as well to join this conversation. And I think these biases are there. For example, I still remember as a young academic, I would, we had colleagues who would stop by every day. And I had a very harsh, because I was also in a position of leadership. You sometimes, just camouflage your personality to be a very harsh person, because you need to just be a no-nonsense person to deal with so many students and so many faculty. And I remember this colleague constantly telling me, beautiful sari you're wearing today. And I'm like, why do you have to stop every day and tell me what beautiful sari what research are you working on? That is the next question you will ask me. And just when I do that and I go back to my feminist discourses, it's really, really paradoxical, to be working in this kind of back and forth spectrum. So if Professor Rajkumar is joining us, we can have that conversation. But I also have a lot of questions from the audience. Clearly, there are a lot of people watching.
And it's a very important conversation. And I want to say that I do agree with what Dr. Kumari and Sandhya were saying, but also equally I'm conscious of the kind of different lived experiences that both Pratibha and Raveena were talking about. I think the first thing which all of us need to recognize, and that's a very important recognition, is that these biases and prejudices are deeply institutionalized and ingrained in the minds of a number of people. And sometimes they're also deeply ingrained in the institutional imagination as well. And so like so many struggles that society has gone through, be it, when it comes to discrimination against people on account of religion or caste or other types of discrimination, this struggle has to be continuous. And I do believe that a lot institutional leadership can do to create a more conducive environment. And I'll give a very simple example. A decade ago, when we would do these conferences and panels, we will obviously have conferences, and like all conferences in India and around the world, it's almost all panels are men, and men would be speakers, men would be chief guests, guests of honor, keynote addresses, and men will just be, dominating the entire discourse. And of course, then over the years, this was very conscious from our standpoint, because as Deepika mentioned, that was part of the ethos of our institution. And we consciously began to recognize the problem and then began to try to ensure that there is more diversity. And then time and again, I would have some of my colleagues tell, oh, we don't have, competent women to be put in the panel. And I would get very exasperated whenever I heard that. And I remember a very interesting conversation I had with a bunch of High Court judges, and I don't want to name anybody, at the National Judicial Academy when I had been there for a lecture. And I would, lament about the fact that we don't have enough women judges. And these judges during the lunch would tell me, we don't have enough competent women judges. And this was very similar to what I would have heard from my colleagues. And then I said, you know what, since we have so many incompetent men judges, let's get some incompetent women judges as well. Let's make it far more fair and inclusive. Of course, they didn't like that comment. But the point is, this has to be a constant effort. And today, if you see, we have, and this may be a signaling effect, but it's a very conscious effort that in our panels, we have a policy now that at least say 30 to 40% of every panel should have women in it. And this will mean a lot more effort to reach out individuals. But in this conference itself, I'm happy to report that there are over 60 women leaders who are speaking in different panels. So in many ways, it also has a signaling impact on the mindset of students and others who are participating in these discussions.
So that's very heartening, especially, I remember about a couple of years ago, there was a HBS conference in India, and I noticed there was only one woman in the 4 panels that they had during the day. So definitely, I think globally, the universities need to take a cue from Jindal. And it was heartening also to hear Deepika talk about your faculty ratio. But I think you need to now go a step further and possibly, look at, that kind of a ratio among your deans also. So it needs to translate into the leadership level.
Right. And also, I certainly think that, many women, many successful women are successful because they are actually men. They behave like men, they think like men, they operate like men. So it's not that just because you're biologically a female makes you a woman leader. Margaret Thatcher was known as the only man in her cabinet. So for order to be successful, a lot of women want to be like men. They do not think that they can be successful and still remain their femininity. A lot of women leaders, and I remember Madhu Kishwar. She was among the very big feminists, and now she's not a feminist. So even claiming yourself to be a feminist is seen like a negative, that and so therefore certainly this whole understanding that you got 50% women there, that's a good step, a very major step forward. But how many of those women are really women? How many of them are female is what you can ensure. But how many of them think like, Professor Bakshi always keeps on saying, I'm a woman. Because he said that it's not, the woman category is not a biological category. It's a socialization, it's an upbringing. So from female to woman is a transition. And how many of the women leaders in that sense are really thinking from the perspective or the life experiences of ordinary women? Because most of us who are in this higher position we have reached for different reasons, we cannot look at the world from my personal experience. As a group, we do say personal is political. But that personal cannot be my individual personal. Personal has to be as a group of people belonging to a certain sex. So certainly not questioning the very definition of who do we call as a woman leader. So a lot of women education has, when you look at Pule. So a lot of education for women got started by male leaders. So it's not that women in positions of leadership always and have always will and always have been promoting women's issues. So certainly we have some, and Justice Geeta Mittal is certainly an example where she's taken it forward. But I was there at the academy in Kakarduma when she came for a session, and she just, because she does think with a heart, and she is a very sensitive judge. So we went to see the lockup in the place, and we found it was horrifying. Immediately she said, no, this has to change. But the in charge of that Kakarduma court at that time was a male judge, and he immediately took his own initiative to change the scenario. So I don't think it's so much the question of whether you are the male in that position or a female. I think it's your commitment to the issues of diversity, the commitment. Rajkumar is a male, but he is thinking in terms of promoting women, so it's 50%. So it's not, so for me, this is very important to notice that merely because there is a woman in a position of leadership, but not a woman, a female in the position of leadership, necessarily she is working for women or vice versa is not true. That's not what I believe. Many years ago, we had for us the first woman professor in the law faculty in Delhi University was Professor Lotika Sarkar. So at some stage, I was asking her life experiences as the first woman professor. And she said, no, she joined the 1956 law faculty, and she was given to teach criminal law, and rape was one of the topics. So the then dean told her that you will not going to teach this course because this is not something women talk about. But she said, I thought of myself as a professor and not as a woman professor. So she changed the sequence and taught it before the male professor would come and teach. And almost, I don't know, 50 years later, at some stage, this subject got dropped because it was too sensitive to talk about. So women issues to the extent of rape was violent, offenses against women was rampant, and this was a huge national concern. Amendments were taking place, and we were not teaching the offense of rape or any offense against women. So we again had a discussion that, no, we need to revamp. And one male colleague of mine said, no, I cannot teach this subject. It was too sensitive for him. And changing the tables, I said, okay, I'll come to your class and teach the topic, and I did. So after 50 years of what Professor Sarkar went through, we were in a completely different scenario where something as basic as rape law, one of my male colleagues refused to teach. And next semester, I said, no, I'm not going to teach in every semester. So you have to take it on. So they said, this is a self-study subject. So the resistance to talk about issues which are closer to women, even when they're introduced an institution, we have the colleague, and today we, of course, we have not only the, it's not limited to male, female colleague also, a lot of female colleagues feel very embarrassed to talk about this subject. So for them, and unless we can deal it in among the faculty which is teaching it, how do we expect our students to normalize that women's issues are human rights issues? We still do not talk about menstruation. We still do not talk about, there's so many taboo areas where we teachers, both men and women. So I'm not saying that only the men are not promoting. Women themselves are also don't think these are worthy. So I certainly think that we really need to think more deeply about when we look at women in leadership, what is the leadership they're leading? What are they leading? Are they leading women's causes always just because they happen to be women leaders? I don't think so.
Sure, Professor Ved Kumari, it's true that identity is not always emancipatory, but I think diversity is also very important. So Sarah Ahmed, in a very famous research on diversity, mentioned that there is always something missing in that diversity, and you become that diversity by filling in that gap. So I think it's really important, and I think it's really inspiring to see a set of all women panelists discussing these issues. And I think it's important to identify their expertise. Now, there are some pressing concerns and questions, and I'm going to take at least one of them because there are too many questions, and anyone can respond. Let me take the first one.
You have 5 more, given the importance of this panel, you will have 5 more minutes beyond the scheduled time.
Okay, we got 5 more minutes. Okay, thank you, Professor Rajkumar. So the first question is, what is the impact of maternity break on the career of women lawyers? Professor.
My favorite question on maternity leave always has been in my gender courses. which article, Article 14 or Article 15, is maternity leave granted. And the moment we say it is special law for women, we have completely ignored that this is not 15.3, it is 14, because women are normal human beings and they do become pregnant. So unless we start asking that question itself, so if we treat them as a special category, so even if we treat them special category, then give them special retirement age, because maternity leave they will take 2 years of childcare leave. So instead of 65, they should retire at 67. So there should be a consequence there. And we certainly know that a lot of women lose their seniority, a lot of experiences in the profession, because they take a few years off to take their maternity leave. And we certainly think that we have done enough for women by granting them and by extending that leave, not realizing that how actually it works the other way around also beyond their essential time when they need a physical recovery. I certainly think that that's a very important question.
Right, thank you. We'd like to hear from you and Professor Drew as well.
It's a very tough question, Deepika. As a leader now in my own profession, you know, this issue comes up, especially when we are discussing compensation all the time. And I'm very proud that, you know, as a country, we have a law now which is more progressive than a lot of other jurisdictions, and women are able to take advantage of it. Before that, definitely things in India were worse. So I think first is something like this does require state intervention. And after that, it becomes the institutional support, right? And there, in the corporate world is where things break down, because the bottom line is profit, and it just, somebody is going to personally witnessed it, and I continue to witness it as a leader in my firm, and I don't have an answer for it. Fact is that clients need to be serviced. So I am, you know, whenever somebody comes back from maternity, we will ensure that, you know, they get projects, but we cannot hold projects that were there. They might have built up those clients. They might have, you know, done all the hard work to have maintained those clients in the firm. But the fact is they need to continue to be maintained. So it's a very, 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 very difficult balance to maintain. And I am talking now about nuances. What I'm talking about doesn't even get discussed in most of the institutions. We have very senior women partners in the firm. So, you know, at least we have those discussions. I know for a fact, you know, when I had 2 maternity leaves, this was not even a discussion in my previous firms. It was like, you know, you come back and you find your own space. It's not our job to, you know, see how you fit in, or, you know, what do we do about it. So I think the more women get senior, it becomes their responsibility. And for the men, it's their responsibility to understand that it's a social necessity. I always break it down to economics. If you don't have women in workforce, India is not going to progress. One of the reasons why India's progress is stalled is because we don't have the 50% of the population that should be contributing to the GDP, other than being a homemaker. It's not happening. So it's an institutional, and thankfully now we are getting pressures from corporates. We have to sign up to diversity policies of corporates. So the new gen companies, the tech companies, thankfully are taking leadership, where they make us give disclosure as to our diversity policies and our ratios. So that's the other place where it's going to really help. So I think it requires state support, requires institutional support, and individually, I know I was pressurized to come back, like to work from when I was on maternity leave. And I know a lot of women feel that pressure. It's upon us to be able to push back on it and exercise our rights, because those rights have been given to us.
I really want to come back on this one more time. Sorry for intervening again, but I certainly believe that the question about how do you calculate GDP? The moment you say if you're working, then your income will be counted towards GDP. Why would the unpaid work women do? That should also be quantified and say how much GDP is contributed by the women. If I take a worker in my household, then she contributes to the GDP. But when I do that work myself, it doesn't count to the GDP. So it's not a question of that 50% of GDP, the women are not contributing to GDP. Their work is not recognized towards calculating GDP. So we need to question the way we calculate GDP rather than saying, push everybody to work. And work means not necessarily, should not be that, are you earning? I ask this class in my class all the time, how many of your mothers are working? And those whose mothers are earning, they say our mother is working. I said, then who does all the work? That who cooks for you, who washes you, who does everything? So that's not even considered work. So I think that's something we need to really relook at the way what we count as work. Why should, and at one point we say that we should have matrimonial property. So matrimonial property will be the one which has been bought together with the money by the two. But what about the unpaid work the women do? And certainly once we expect, and this whole thing about leave, maternity leave. So with maternity leave, that was absolutely essential for women to have because it's a biological necessity also. But when it came to childcare leave, what has the state done? Women only will take. So we are by state legislation saying, it is your responsibility to look after your children till the age of 18. The fathers have discharged their responsibility by taking 15 days of paternity leave. So they are through with their fatherly obligations to bring up the children, but it is by state. So for me, this is very questionable. That, and when you give all these quote unquote benefits to women, then certainly as an employer, why would I want to have a woman who will go on maternity leave and my project would suffer? I would want to have a continuity of the projects. So once then Pratibha did recognize that the primary function of corporate is profit. So that is my starting point. Then why would I have women in my firm? But they are going to, and especially we had so many state laws. LIC had this policy of when you're filling up a form, you have to say, when was your last menstruation cycle? That are you not already pregnant before you take law? So we have been struggling with all those state laws, which are saying, oh, if you are pregnant, we had the air hostesses, you become pregnant and there's so many years. Also, the Supreme Court says that restriction on women after marriage not to have children for 4 years is going to help the population policy of the country. At that time, 800 plus women were there in the air hostesses. So if this 800 women will not produce children for 4 years, that will impact the national policy of national population policy. But the male bursars at the same time can keep on producing children. That doesn't matter. So I certainly think we really need to rethink obligation of child rearing, because childbearing is an absolutely exclusively woman's responsibility. But child rearing, why it has to continue to be her exclusive responsibility? There has to be obligation. If you have a child, you have to take leave along with your wife. You cannot come to work. Unless we impose those kinds of restrictions, so the men can be free to do whatever they want to do without sharing any responsibilities. We were talking about pandemic. Certainly when a company hires a male, it gets 2 persons for the salary of one who is working and the woman who is supporting him to be on time, to be happy in that household, to do everything, to come late. She looks after everything in the household. So they get 2 persons to be working for them while they're paying salary for one. When a woman takes up a job, she takes up a aya also. So she actually takes the money from the company and gives some money to the aya. So and certainly the company is also saying, well, I'm only getting half the woman because half the time she has to work on the home also. So women are not lucrative because of the biological category, the way we have set up the market, the way we have set up the norms for promotions, the way we have set up that being on time is essential for being a good worker. And women with these children, so small children who is becoming ill or something, they cannot be as regular. They might be working more, they might be working harder. But the way we have created our policies for their appointments, for promotions, for leadership positions are so anti-women.
Right, Professor Kumar, that's absolutely right. I think, Professor Drew, we'd like to hear from you as well. I'm afraid we're out of time, so we'd like to hear from you, and then maybe Raveena can have the last word.
Yes, I agree absolutely with what Professor Kumari has eloquently said. It's not just a problem of maternity leave, it's about the choice. You know, there's a clash here between, you know, at the bar it's a bit less of an issue, but for city firms, I know people who have left, you know, long inflexible hours versus being the prime person in the household who's supposed to look after the children. In the words of that district judge, there's a nuisance. I think of one of my first cases where it was a pregnancy dismissal case. The judge was unwise enough to say in the judgment, the claimant should have thought of the consequences of her actions. Off we went to the appeal court. You know, there's still that mindset, I fear. But I have nothing really to add. And it seems to me, I mean, Professor Kumari has said it all, that, I mean, this is another argument for moving from the exceptional individuals towards, as Professor Raj Kumar has said, the 50-50 balance. Is it just, you know, tips the weight of all those people who have to make those choices and get moved away because they're thought not to commit to the firm and so forth.
Thank you so much. Raveena, would you like to come in?
Sorry, I don't have enough senior experience to talk about maternity leave, but what I can say is that I think the pandemic has brought us to a point where, you know, on a general level, we are thinking about institutional changes, and we can actually think of meaningful structural and cultural changes that can benefit female lawyers and organizations where they work, be it law firms, be it academia, or even different sections of society. The problems highlighted are all pertinent, and some institutions have begun implementing them as well. But there's still a long way to go, and at least we're having discussions today, which is the right step forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really, really ironic that we live in a heteronormative society that rewards, socially and legally rewards reproduction, but then on the other hand, we also live in a society that penalizes reproductive choices. So I think it's a hard question, and it's really important for all of us to deliberate on this. I've had a really wonderful time having this wonderful conversation. Thank you to Professor Rajkumar for curating this wonderful panel. I look forward to having more such conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right. Take this moment to thank each one of you for your time. I really appreciate Professor Kumari, Professor Sandhya, Deepika, Pratibha, and of course, Raveena. I want to say that as law schools and institutions, we should be doing at least 5 things, and I will quickly say that. First, we need to celebrate the achievements of women faculty and scholars and should consciously do so. Second, we need to constantly work towards diversifying the faculty with more stronger representation of women in the law schools, in teaching, research, and administration. Institutions need to dramatically change themselves with strong women leadership at all levels. Third, women law students need to be constantly reminded and empowered to be able to fulfill their fullest potential. They need to be told that they can achieve the pinnacle of their dreams and aspirations and overcome all the challenges through knowledge, expertise, and skills which will form their foundation. Fourth, at least in India, we really need to overcome the national and global embarrassing situation that we are in with so few judges in the Supreme Court and the High Courts. For a country that has had both women assuming the offices of Prime Minister and President, we really need to have some future Chief Justices who happen to be women. Fifth, every occasion of discrimination need to be called out, and we should develop intolerance for any form of discrimination. This is my I Have a Dream speech, and I hope that we can work towards changing the situation that we are in. I know for sure that each one of you are contributing to the change, and I'm grateful to you for sharing some of your perspectives today.
Yeah, I think Pratibha wants to say something. Yeah.
We added one practical one for you. You should be teaching unconscious bias in every class.
We'll have a pedagogical practice on that. Thank you so much.